Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jake Cashin, and I am the 2020 Economic Development Committee Chair, and it is my pleasure to tee up the next panel. However, following Ms. Lee Brown is not going to be easy. It's not going to be an easy task, but we have a wonderful panel set up today that I'm very excited about. Realtors rely on data every day to assist clients in understanding the decisions they make. But what does data say about the decisions which could be made? And what about the insights that the data can provide for how we make future decisions? Joining us today are three data experts who will provide an inside look at where the state of housing is right now and what the future might hold. Dr. Jessica Lautz is Vice President of Demographics and Behavioral Insights at the National Association of Realtors. The core of her research focuses on analyzing trends for both NAR members and housing consumers. Dr. Robert Dietz is Chief Economist and Senior Vice President for Economics and Housing Policy for the National Association of Home Builders, where his responsibilities include housing market analysis, economic forecasting and industry surveys, and housing policy research. George Ratu is Senior Economist with Realtor.com, where he delivers information and insights to empower consumers and realtors on their real estate journeys. They each are going to give us a brief overview of their respective viewpoints on the current data regarding the industry, and then we'll jump into questions. We want to hear from you, so put your questions in the Q&A section. We will do our best to get to them all. So now, let's start off with Dr. Jessica Lautz. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you guys so much for having me here. I'm super excited to be here, not only to present and share with you guys some latest research that honestly is hot off the presses from this morning, but also to be here with George and Robert Dietz, because I just respect them so much and the insights that they have as well. So excited to hear their latest and greatest. So I have been actually titling my presentation that we're in an Instapot situation. We literally are in a pressure cooker, and I don't care whether you have kids who are sitting behind you doing virtual learning, you have 15 animals that you're trying to take care of. I only have 5 in this house, but I do have a lot. Whether you're taking care of an older relative, or you're one of the blessed people who actually has an older adult child living at home, because I think that there are a lot of people right now who are feeling all of the pressures, financially, work-wise, family-wise. And as we all are in this pressure cooker situation, what we have seen is that home sales have actually skyrocketed. There's a lot of people who need to leave the situation that they're currently in. Right now, what we have, we released our existing home sales data yesterday. It was the highest annualized level since December of 2006. This is incredible. It actually hit 6 million. It is higher than pre-pandemic. There's a lot of people who left the housing market who are now coming back into the housing market, but there's a lot of people who are really reevaluating where they're living. The other thing that's happening is that home prices have continued to grow. We don't have enough inventory on the market. Buyers are there, but sellers are more reluctant to sell their homes. And there's a lot of people who are saying, well, why don't I buy a second property? And so that's really heating up demand as well. The other thing that we're seeing is that the typical list time to contract is only 22 days. That is the shortest time period that we have collected. These are hitting records continually. The 101 or the 102 months of year-over-year home price growth is the longest period of time since 1968 we have ever collected this period of time. We also know that members are saying that 3 in 5 of them are saying the market is hotter than normal. This is not a typical post-Labor Day market where there is this much buyer demand to change where people are living. In North Carolina, we're seeing double-digit home price gains in Raleigh. In Charlotte and Raleigh, we're actually seeing sales are stronger within the city. There's a lot of people saying, you know, I want to leave the DC area, New York, Boston, but where's a city that I can go where I can still have the dynamic nature of a city, where there are jobs available, but I can work remotely and is a quick flight away if I need to be back into my office location. I think people are really looking at smaller cities and saying, this provides the amenities that I really want, but also it is a smaller location, less dense area than where I am living right now. The other thing that we're seeing is that in your state, we also see that mobility is still down. People are not coming out. They're not going to restaurants the way that they used to. You're not going to movie theaters or sporting events the way that had been happening pre-COVID. So it's still down. It's not as low as where you see in some areas of the country, but it is still considerably low. When we look at home buyers, and this is truly hot off the fresh press, I got the data this morning. So the charts are not super pretty, but I think they're important to look at. Consumers are essentially telling us, those who are in the buying activity right now, we're surveying them in waves. And what we have seen is that most are actually saying, I'm ready to go to an open house. I feel like this is a safe activity for me to do. I don't need a medical breakthrough. I don't need some sort of assurance from my local government. There is some share of people who are saying that, but more are actually saying that I'm actually active in this activity or I am ready to go and do this activity. When we look at touring a home, so outside of an open house, what we've seen is that the vast majority are feeling like this is actually a safe activity to do. I just want to highlight this data because I think it's so incredibly important when we look at this. It really shows how quickly the real estate market pivoted, how quickly realtors changed the transactions that they're doing, the way they're doing their transactions to make sure that everyone is safe in this COVID environment, and making sure that there's masks being used, gloves, whatever makes buyers and sellers feel safe in that activity, that is happening in your area. And we see that happening on a nationwide scale. And that's why really the real estate market did see that strong V down, but it really had that steep V back up and has actually recovered more than pre-pandemic levels. The other thing that we're seeing and why people want to move, and I think this is fascinating data, we actually asked them, why are you ready to move right now? More than half are concerned about their physical health. So again, moving from that less dense area into, or moving to a less dense area. 20% are concerned about social unrest. So perhaps they're tired of protests in their cities. They want to move to a different area of the country. I think this 14% is kind of hilarious. They need to separate from the people they're living with. I think this is a fascinating share of people. Maybe we will see a divorce boom coming out of this. I'm not quite sure. And then 14% are just tired of the four walls and they got to make a move. Also looking at this consumer data, a quarter of people right now are considering a second home. There's a lot of change in spending that has been going on. You're not spending necessarily as much on entertainment, on vacation, even on clothes. And so there's a lot of money that has been chalked away for some families. And a quarter of them are actually considering a second home, maybe keeping that condo downtown, but looking at places like the Outer Banks that could be very attractive for people to purchase the second home at. Beach is beautiful year round. The other thing that we're seeing is that a lot of money has been diverted to remodeling. If you're staying in those four walls, maybe you're thinking about redoing your kitchen or redoing your yard, and we really have seen this cost also tick up. And if anyone's trying to find a remodeler, good luck, because it is very, very difficult to find that right now. So we also know from our members' perspective that the transaction has actually changed. The home search has changed. People typically pre-COVID were looking at about a dozen homes in 2018 before they put a contract down. Last year, that shrunk to just 9 homes before they put a contract down. And right now they're only touring 3 homes before they put a contract down, if they can find that home in their price point. And what's really happening here is that people are doing their homework online. They're looking at those virtual tours. They're taking advantage of the tech tools that they can. And then they're saying, let's go see this home in person. I want to be strategic. There's not a lot of inventory and I want to stay safe. The other thing that we're seeing is that sellers are prepared. And I know from Lee Brown's videos, I think they're really cool. It shows me a lot of tips I can do to my own house, but there's a lot of people who are taking advantage of working with your agent beforehand, really being prepared to have your home ready for the market. As we all binge watch a lot of TV right now, HGTV, we all know that the expectations are so much higher. We see a huge shift away from city centers, but we also see this change in home features that people are looking for. I listened to the last panel, so I'm not going to dwell on this chart. We all know about the home office, the yard space, the victory gardens. Can't underscore it enough. We're getting this consumer data back too, and we hear a lot of this, and a lot of it is changing week to week and month to month about what's important. I suspect the kitchen is going to be so much more important as we hit around the holidays, but that's a typical thing where we do see the importance change. But there is a shift away from these multifamily homes into single family preferences. All right, so demographics. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. 1 in 6 Gen Xers and younger boomers purchased a multi-generational home last year. This is only going to grow. There's a lot of people who don't want their aging adult relatives in senior centers right now from healthcare perspectives, but we also know that they just want to be with them. They haven't seen them in weeks or months. The other share that we're seeing is that 52% of 19 to 29-year-olds are living at home with their family. 52%. That is an astronomical figure. It is the highest share since the Great Depression. And it really speaks to a lot of young adults who probably were young professionals renting apartments in city centers, now moving home with mom and dad and saying they have a stocked pantry, they have a stocked freezer, let me take advantage of that. It also speaks to colleges who went remote, people doing gap years. And so these young adults are now at home when typically they would be out of that home. This is a very large share and likely a share that's going to increase, and people are probably going to have to change where they're living. The other thing there's been a lot of fodder about is a big baby boom and a kindergarten class full of pandemicas 5 years from now. I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think that there's going to be a huge baby boom on this. I'm quite pessimistic. I think we're going to have a continued baby bust. What we're seeing right now is that for home buyers who have kids under the age of 18, it has shrunk from nearly 60% to 35% in recent years. I think we're going to see a continuation of this. A lot of people who lost their jobs through no fault of their own are in the younger generations, in the generation that would be having babies right now. And unfortunately, kids are expensive. And so I don't quite think that we're going to see this huge baby boom coming out of this. The one thing that we are seeing right now is there has been a clearing of shelters around the country. I know this is lighthearted, but it is impacting that people will choose to buy a home, and they will choose where they buy a home because of these pets. For unmarried couples, for single females, where the dog park is, where those walking trails are, the accommodation of the pets matters more to them than schools. And I think that's an important note. I also want to say that I think that 2021 is likely to be the year of the roommate. We have seen that marriage rates have dropped in this country, and I think that there is going to be a larger share who are purchasing with a roommate as an unmarried couple, doubling up because housing affordability is such a constraint right now. It is hard to find a home to purchase on a single income. So we've seen single females drop to 17% from a high of 27%. At the same time that marriage rates are dropping. So we know that there's a lot of single females out there, but unfortunately she can't buy a home on her own without coupling up perhaps with a roommate or doubling up as an unmarried couple. That being said, I do think that a lot of people are tired of living by themselves. So the year of the roommate, I think that could happen. All right. The alleviation of student loan debt, not completely, but it did go to a 0% interest loan, which is great for a lot of people who can really tackle the principal of their debt, pay down that debt, get their debt to income ratio in check, especially if they went to live with mom and dad. They can really tackle that debt right now. 47% of student loan debt was a negative amortization loan before the stimulus package. So this could be a huge leg up for these young adults to be able to enter homeownership right now. That being said, the other thing that happened is it automatically went into forbearance. So it did allow these student loan debt holders to essentially be able to tackle other higher interest debt if they needed to right now, or if they lost their job, had wages cut, etc. All right, so what's next? What's on the horizon? I have a lot of question marks here. I don't know what's next necessarily, but I do think that here's some food for thought. What I'm thinking, at least, is that there could be a growth in tiny homes on land. There's a lot of people who are used to tiny apartments, tiny condos, just need fresh air, really place a premium on that yard space right now, want a less dense neighborhood, and say, I want a tiny home on land. This will work for me. The other thing that we could see is that vacation hotspots plus good broadband, maybe that's your primary home moving forward. Early retirement purchases, something that was far on the horizon for a lot of people. They might actually be thinking, these are historically low interest rates. Let me take advantage. Let me go purchase this right now. I could spend months there right now, pretend it's retirement. I'll go back into my primary residence at some point, but this gives me another opportunity. If these things start happening, these three things, I think we could see a reinvention of rural areas, traditional recreation areas that were only seasonally. We could see them embraced year round. And I think that could really make a transformation of the commercial businesses that are wanted in those areas as well. Big question mark here. The vast majority of students are doing virtual learning or some hybrid learning right now. It's a huge question mark for families. How does school come into play? Do you need to be close to those? And then also the drop in tenure in home. And this is where I'll leave you, is that traditionally we saw that people moved every 6 to 7 years. It rose to a high of 10 years and before people sold. Some reasons behind that, of course, there's a lot. People were underwater in their loans, they had lower interest rates, they refied into, et cetera, et cetera. But a big thing is that people traditionally move because something in their life happened. They got married, they got divorced, they had a child. But all of those things dropped as we saw marriage rates and birth rates drop. Those reasons went by the wayside. And the top reason to actually sell and move was to be closer to friends and family. Right now, we are all having a life change, regardless of where you are in the pandemic. It does seem to be changing lives. And I think that this could be an opportunity for people to say, I have to move. And I think that's really what we're seeing in this rebound right now with the housing market. Check out Right Tools right now. I have no more time. Do check it out, and then check us out on Facebook and all the social media. Okay. Goodbye. Thank you.
Uh-oh. No. Hello?
Hello.
I'm sorry, Dr. Lyles, my screen has messed up, but appreciate your insight there. That was fantastic information. Dr. Robert Dietz, you're up next.
Great. Thank you very much. It's good to join you today. It's especially fun to join Jessica and George, who I've known for a long time. I think it's probably more fun when economists present and they, kind of debate and disagree with each other. Unfortunately, I agreed with about 95% of what Jessica said, and it was great seeing the hot off the presses data on preferences. I think my presentation might just be called but here's some more data on home building. So, kind of here's where we see our current economic outlook. We do think it's about a 2-year recovery period for the overall economy. I think this is a critical message in DC, which is I spend a fair amount of my time talking to policymakers. Housing is leading the economic recovery. This is a moment for housing to shine. We are 16% of GDP. We see the positive data, whether it's mortgage purchase applications data that we got today from mortgage bankers that showed purchase data up 25% year over year, or new home sales, which have been surprisingly strong. We keep chasing our forecast higher on this. New home sales thus far in 2020 are 8% higher than they were last year at this time. And, realtors and everyone else who's in the housing industry knows this, inventory is tight. We only have a 4-month supply. New home pricing is going to go up, and that's due to some of our risk factors, lumber prices in particular. I'll show you some data on that. And I think we do have to acknowledge that there's some risk from renewed lockdowns. It's hard to forecast in this environment because as economists, we're not used to forecasting virus patterns. But, I think we have to acknowledge that as a risk as we move into the fall and the winter. And something that we've been really sort of out there trying to get the message out is that this suburban shift, this move toward, at least in terms of the construction data, lower density areas of the country, certainly outside New York and outside San Francisco, is real. There's been some articles saying there's no evidence of this. That's just dead wrong. There's plenty of evidence for this, and we see this in a lot of the local markets. So in terms of our overall GDP forecast, the second quarter of 2020 was the worst quarter we'd had since World War II, negative 30% growth rate. I did watch the prior panel, and people were saying that 2021 is going to be tougher than 2020. I disagree. I think there's going to be lingering challenges, but 2021 will have a positive growth rate. We've got a rebound now, the third quarter. Our forecast has it up 20%. Goldman Sachs has it as high as a 30% growth rate this quarter. So there is a rebound building. It's going to diminish and slow down as we go into 2021. But the second quarter of 2020 was just a remarkably terrible quarter. And I don't think we're going to see anything like that in 2021, even as we deal with some of these lingering issues. So that provides a broad base of support for real estate activity going into next year. As I said at the beginning, lumber is a top concern for builders. It kind of matches with some of the issues that the industry has had with skilled labor, trying to find construction workers, electricians, framers who can work on construction sites. But lumber is the top issue. If you ask builders right now, what's limiting you from adding additional inventory? The current price is now above $950 per thousand board feet. And since the low point in mid-April, it's up more than 170%. Now, futures markets suggest that some of those price gains are slowing down, but the reasons behind it are just basic economics. We've got a decline in domestic lumber production. Some of that was made due to forecasting decisions in the spring. Some of it is maybe social distancing. But we also have a 20% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber, where we get a third of our lumber supplies in the United States. So the result is, as the housing market rebounded and showed a lot of strength, prices took off. And it's adding probably about $16,000 to a typical new single-family home, and probably about $6,000 to a new apartment. As I mentioned, labor is another issue. The home building and remodeling industry lost just under 460,000 jobs in the spring. The good news, we gained 81% of those back through August. And in fact, in the next 2 or 3 months, there's going to be a moment in one of those monthly job reports where the housing industry, home building and remodeling, posts a year-over-year gain in employment. And when we have an 8% unemployment rate and most sectors are experiencing job losses and trying to bring back people, that is a remarkable element of strength and really illustrates the V-shaped recovery in housing. The data you're looking at the slide, though, is the challenge. It's not just a head count in terms of getting workers into the construction industry, but we've got to train them as well. That red line is construction worker productivity, and it's flat since the year I graduated high school. I mean, no gains when the overall economy is up more than 30% over the same period in terms of overall productivity. So skilled labor shortage, that remains an issue for builders in terms of trying to add additional inventory to the market. And something, I talk to a lot of realtors around the country in addition to builders. Regulatory costs are still a limiting factor when it comes to land development and home building. We estimate that about 24% of the price of a typical newly built home is due to various regulatory burdens, and 2/3 of those occur at the land development stage. So that is a remaining challenge. Where do we think the market's going? Well, home builder confidence, this is our monthly builder sentiment indicator. It reached a level in September of 83. It's a 0 to 100 point scale. Anything above 50 is considered positive, but 83 is the top score in the history of the index, even back to the housing boom. And it's being driven by new growth in buyer traffic for builders. And some of this is local, and some of this is the kind of suburban shift. It's people looking in other parts of the country, low density, better affordability, better quality of life. And builders are seeing a lot of traffic in front of them that they ordinarily wouldn't see. And you can see the HMI, which is the blue line on this slide, moves very closely with the red, which is single family starts. And there's that V-shaped. You can see the decline that we saw in the spring, and then housing construction bounced back really quickly, thanks to low interest rates, thanks to the focus on the importance of home, the need for more space, all those elements that Jessica talked about in terms of consumer preferences. So in terms of our forecast, I'm still pretty conservative. We did experience losses, about 24% decline in starts at their peak in the spring. You can see the little dip down in the single family construction conditions. So for 2020 as a whole, we've got it pretty close to flat. And frankly, there's more upside risk to the forecast right now. So additional revisions may actually show us showing a gain for single family construction in 2020. And as I said before, with GDP growing and the labor market continuing to improve, we do expect growth in single family construction in 2021 and 2022. And North Carolina is one of the bright spots even within the construction industry. Single family starts in the state right now are up 11% year to date. And we see those kinds of gains spread out all over the country. It's not just in areas like the South that have benefited from population growth, but places in the Midwest that had suffered before, but are now experiencing higher demand thanks to better affordability conditions. And then in terms of preferences, new home size. So this is a measure of newly built single family home size. For the last 4 or 5 years, it's actually been going down. And the reason was that builders were building that entry-level inventory that was needed, try to get smaller homes to fit particularly millennials, but also young Gen X buyers' budgets. I think those home size declines, though, have now ended, and we're going to see over the next 2 years home size begin to tick up. And this might be the one area where maybe I disagree a little bit with Jessica. I just see within our buyer traffic the idea that people want more space. They want one home office. I've even heard from builders saying they want 2 home offices, or at least space to be able to do that. So we think the declines in home size that we saw during the second half of the last decade are now going to reverse, and home size is going to go up going forward. And then I've mentioned this a few times, but what is the evidence of this suburban shift? It's pretty clear in the construction data. The counties that you've got on the map in front of you represent in blue the exurbs of large metro areas, and in the orange, outer suburbs of small metropolitan areas. Together, they represent somewhat less than 20% of single-family construction. And yes, the exurbs in the second quarter were down 9% compared to the second quarter of 2019. Although that was a lot better than the declines that we saw in the urban cores, which were down almost 20%. So the exurbs outperformed in terms of single-family construction. And then look at the orange. And I actually kind of highlighted here in red. Those orange counties were up almost 3% compared to where they were in the second quarter of 2019. It was the only economic geography we tracked that showed a gain, and it happens to be the least dense areas of the country. So I think there's pretty clear evidence in single family construction that we're seeing this kind of suburban shift. It's not an exodus, but we're seeing demand move out into these lower density, lower cost of living areas. And yes, if you look at the North Carolina map, a lot of orange counties, a few of the blue within the state. In terms of apartment construction is going to have more weakness going forward. We're looking for a fairly significant decline in 2020, as well as 2021. Rents are weakening, rental vacancy rates are going up, and then it gets back to this notion of moving away from some of these high density markets. And you can see with the local data, North Carolina right now, apartment construction is down 11% year to date. Something to keep in mind about the apartment market, there's very little new condo production. Most multifamily, 96%, is built for rent. Historically, it was 80%. So there's very little condo production. This is really more of a rental story going forward. And just like single family, multifamily is also spreading out into these lower density areas. The areas that are brown through red on this map represent 30% of apartment construction starts, but all of these areas are growing faster in terms of apartment construction. So we're going to see more low-rise, more apartments with a door that faces directly the outside, that avoids elevators, avoids common spaces. This is what apartment developers are going to basically build on to continue to construct apartments going into next year. And Jessica mentioned remodeling. Remodeling market is very hot. We've got gains for 2020. We think it will slow down a little bit because some of this is pulling forward demand and repair activity that otherwise would have taken place. But people are making additions. It's not just kitchen and bath remodeling, which is usually where we see a lot of the strength, but restructuring their homes, trying to fix up things for home office space. All of these demands are being reported by remodelers as a strength for the industry. And then just to wrap up, I think we really need to contrast where we are now with this downturn versus the Great Recession. The Great Recession was concentrated in single family construction. This one is more non-residential. So that blue line is total residential construction spending. It includes single family, it includes apartments. It's going to take about 2 years to recover, mostly due to weakness in the apartment market. In contrast, the red is non-residential construction, so everything else. It's going to take 4 to 6 years for non-residential construction to get back to where it was, because we're going to see weakness in office, in retail, in highway construction, with state and local government budgets being constrained and changes in basically economic activity as we move forward. So I want to thank you very much. I'm happy to be here on the panel, and I look forward to your questions when we get to Q&A.
Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate your detailed presentation there. I was looking through some stuff and making some notes, and you touched on a lot of what we hope to have seen. So I appreciate your insight there. George, you guys are a really detailed data group over at Realtor.com. Talk to us a little about what you're seeing and what you all are experiencing now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jake. And hello, North Carolina Realtors. It is Wednesday. We're officially in the fall. And well, guess what? Mid-afternoon, you're sitting listening to a whole bunch of economists. You are some brave and sturdy souls. It's so good to be here. And great to see all the great insights from Jessica and Robert. So let me start diving in. I really want to look at the data story from the lens of the three main questions. One, what is driving today's real estate market? How are these drivers impacting the markets themselves? And lastly, I want to touch a little bit through the lens of some data we collect through, on Realtor.com on the cross-market demand patterns in North Carolina. So starting with part one, what is driving today's real estate markets, right? And where are you? You're likely at home. And so if I were to take one picture, sum up not only 1,000, maybe 10,000 words in one, this would be it, right? We're all sitting at home, we're running companies, we're running daycares, we're running online school centers. And if you have college-age kids, you're also running a dorm on top of maybe a catering company. And don't forget the gym, right? Because you probably have your kettlebells run under your desk and you're swinging every day. I know it. Well, I am. So I can imagine you are too, right? So all jokes aside, however, so what do I see as the three main drivers of activity? Number one, real estate, Federal Reserve's monetary policy and accompanying, though not always directly tied, mortgage rates. These are playing important roles. Second, the coming of age of remote work, something that's been building for decades and COVID accelerated this. And the third driver of real estate activity are demographics, generational cohorts, and we saw that in Jessica's data. And so I'll touch a little bit on millennials and Gen Xers. So starting with the Federal Reserve, it was one of the first institutions early March of this year to recognize the severity of this pandemic on the economy. And really the Fed has thrown everything and the kitchen sink at this problem. Obviously we have their zero, what the economists call the zero lower bound, right? We have free money just being showered through the banking system on the economy. And so this is obviously driving a lot of liquidity. It's kept really a lot of companies in business and it's kept deals going. In addition, the Fed, among all the other programs, in its acronym soup of programs, it's also engaged directly in mortgage-backed security purchases to further ensure that in the housing market specifically, liquidity remains flowing. So when you put on top of that, so volatility in the stock market, a lot of private investors have also been flocking to the MBS market, looking for more stability. So that's driven down a lot of the rates. When you look on your right, you see the chart of Freddie's mortgage rates. As of last week, 2.87 for the 30-year fixed. Really, we've seen a year in which mortgage rates have broken new record lows. I think we're up to 9 times already. And we're likely going to see that continue to be part of the real estate landscape. Number two, I talked about the fact that remote work has come of age this year. And interestingly, we ran a survey of consumers nationally this year, in which we asked them a series of questions. One of them was, what's your work statuses? And you can tell on the chart on your left, close to 4 in 10 Americans are working remotely as a result of COVID. And that's on top of those who are working from home before that. Interestingly, we followed that question up by asking, where do you prefer working? And what you can see right there is over half of Americans prefer working remotely. This will be interesting to keep an eye on as we move into 2021, because a lot of, I know, companies have already made the remote home work policy permanent, but a lot of other companies are still looking forward to the day of reopening. How much of their workforce is willing and will be willing to return to the office remains a question mark. In addition, the other thing that happened as a result of remote work, it has accelerated people's plans to purchase homes. We asked this question and we got over 60% of consumers we surveyed said they plan to buy a home due to the newfound remote workability. That's obviously a serious driver of what we're seeing in today's market in terms of activity. Interestingly, when we looked at demographics, it showed us that young buyers, 18 to 34 age group, had the largest share that indicated they plan to buy a home. So I think this speaks very well to where the market is today and likely headed forward. And so what do we want this year in terms of homes? You've heard it from other speakers as well. Well, it turns out we want bigger homes, we want more outdoor space, and we absolutely want a home office. And so the mortgage rates, which have been so low, have absolutely helped with these priorities. From those we surveyed, a good share said they can look in better neighborhoods, they can look at larger or more expensive homes. And to me, interestingly, and it speaks to what we've heard even from Robert about this transition from urban to suburban, people are willing to actually live or commute farther away from work in this environment. So what does that mean for 2020? And really, I believe beyond, we're likely going to see a lot less gray and a lot more green in terms of what people are looking for in neighborhoods. And here, I mean, the shift to the suburban is undeniable. I know that even in August, there were a lot of people still questioning whether there's really a shift towards suburbs. I think that very much is so. And to Jessica's earlier point, I think people are looking even farther than the suburbs. Look at vacation destinations, whether it's lakefront properties, whether it's ski resorts. There is a froth of activities in some of these second home destinations in today's market. And I say that this shift from gray to green is really a boon to North Carolina housing markets. And then the third reason, as I mentioned, driving today's markets are generational cohorts. What you see here are the share of mortgage originations this year, and you can tell they're dominated by 25 to 44-year-olds. So mostly millennials and some of the really, in a sense, younger Gen Xers. They are the ones driving. And in fact, when you see this, it's a natural coming of age story here too. Millennials are having families, they're having children, maybe not as many as prior generations. But as soon as you have a kid, first question you're going to ask is, where are the good schools? Suburbs still have the edge on that. So we're going to see this generational cohort continue to drive housing. So how are these drivers impacting today's real estate markets?
George, I'm sorry, may I interrupt you real quick?
Yes.
Your presentation is not on the screen and some folks are asking to see it. Would you mind sharing it?
Oh, absolutely. And
thank you. I hope I didn't interrupt your train of thought, but I appreciate it.
Not at all. I'm so glad. Too bad I didn't realize that earlier.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. So my apologies for that. So how are these main drivers impacting markets? How does that work? Does it show, Jake?
Yes, sir. You're good to go.
Perfect. So we are seeing and looking at markets through the lens of a recovery index that we put together at Realtor.com, where we look at housing demand, home supply, housing prices, and the pace of sales. And what we're seeing, and you can see on this chart, is the market started the year on a really strong upbeat note in January, and we went on a nice upward trend through early March, and then the market obviously dropped spectacularly. And we've seen, to Robert's point about a V-shaped recovery, we have seen this recovery take place right before our eyes. And the interesting part about this is the pace of activity in the market continues very strongly, even in what traditionally it would be a much slower time of the year as we move now officially into fall. So we see demand continue to drive activity. What we don't see as much, of course, and Robert addressed it very well, is the pace of supply. That's still lagging for obvious reasons. And so for us, when we look at inventory, you can see the active listing count on the chart on your left from Realtor.com. You can tell there's been a steep drop. In fact, we've had double-digit rate of declines for almost a year. We're near record lows. And in tandem with that, due to the tight supply, what we see is prices are accelerating on a steep upward trend. In fact, we've had, since we track this information now weekly, we have had 3 consecutive weeks in which listing prices have risen over 11% year over year. In a sense, a very strong pricing activity. So strong, in fact, that I think it's really beginning to put a lot of pressure on affordability. What you see here are earnings compared to home prices, average early earnings versus our median listing price. And you can tell that home prices, by and large, have been outpacing incomes for quite a while. I only go back to 2017 for this chart, but Go back to right after the last recession, and the trajectory of prices has outpaced incomes. Except now that pace is almost doubling what hourly workers are making. So that really is beginning to put a lot of pressure, particularly for first-time buyers. So to wrap things up, I wanted to look at where are shoppers who are considering North Carolina markets coming from. So the answer is, who is looking at homes in Charlotte? And this comes from viewer statistics on our platform. You can tell that over 65% of views to Charlotte are actually coming from the metro and of course, North Carolina. And in the top viewing metros, you see there, Raleigh, Greensboro, Hickory, and Winston-Salem obviously play an important role. But over 32% are out-of-state viewers. And so you see there Atlanta, New York, DC, Miami, Chicago, and Philadelphia as top markets, a clear indicator that a lot of buyers who have lived in high-priced coastal areas are really reconsidering the premium they're willing to pay to live there. And so affordability very much drives a lot of the migration that shopping patterns are seeing today. And Charlotte obviously has that in spades. Some of the earlier speakers in the prior panel mentioned that, right? It's an urban metro. It has a diversity of economy, strong financial sector, so job availability is there. But at the same time, compared to a market like even DC or New York, is a lot more affordable. The similar picture we're seeing in Raleigh, right, where over again 65% are either city or state viewers. Over 30% are out of state. And again, New York, Atlanta, DC, Philly are playing an important role in sending buyers towards North Carolina markets. And then I wanted to consider as an alternative Asheville, a much smaller market, very popular for its natural beauty, along with obviously what the city has to offer in terms of the music scene. I was there last year. I was amazed at the number of breweries in town, right? It is sort of microbrew capital. So here you see obviously strong presence from buyers in Charlotte, as well as Raleigh and some of the other markets. But a big contingent of buyers from Miami, Nashville, Tampa, Orlando. So Florida buyers are clearly considering the Asheville market much more strongly. So for me, all these trends really mirror and echo what Jessica, what Robert, what prior speakers said, that today's market is obviously benefiting from a young demographic, is benefiting from the incredibly low mortgage rates. But at the same time, as we look towards the remainder of 2020 and into 2021, the issue of affordability, I think, is likely to play a bigger role into decisions. And I think it's something that in many cases can be addressed, obviously at the local level, whether it's Robert's point, talking about regulations, everything from zoning to development costs, obviously are sometimes things that can be controlled. And I think realtors can play an important role in those decisions. So while you're home, binging on the latest shows, if you're looking for any resources, don't forget realtor.com/research. You can get a lot more data from our data library, both nationally, metro level. And if you're active on social media, you can also keep up with our daily updates on Twitter. And with that, I thank you so much for the invitation, and turn the presentation back over to Jake.
George, thank you so very much. Wow, that was great. I was writing down a number of questions that I was hoping to be able to get to, but we only have about 3 minutes left, and I'm debating on which one to ask. I think they're both probably softballs to all three of you, but if we can just in the 3 minutes, if we can just do a quick lightning round of answers. It kind of touched, George, on what you mentioned last, and it's about regulations, local, state, federal regulations. Is there a database of how much regulations add to the price of housing, and how might we be able to get and use that data in order to drive down the cost, therefore making homes more affordable to folks here in North Carolina?
Well, let me say, and maybe this might be called a cop out on my end. Robert had a fantastic breakdown, and in fact, I should let him, and I will let him speak more about that, because he had one of the charts showing that about 2/3 of the cost of a new home are due to these regulatory red tape. So I'll pass it on to Robert.
Yeah, no, thank you, George. It's a great question. It is something that's difficult to measure. There's something called the Wharton Regulatory Land Index that gives us a city by city view of how land gets into the regulatory cost. But otherwise, it's an area that we don't actually study very well. So my team publishes every 5 years a survey that we do with land developers and builders. It is about 24% of the price of a typical new home, 32% of an apartment. And as George said, land is really key, zoning reform and some of the environmental regulations.
Jessica, sorry, do you have anything to add?
I truly have nothing to add on this. I think the gentlemen are much smarter than me on this one.
Well, thank you. I was actually in a meeting just yesterday with the developer who confirmed what you all have said about the cost, the lumber cost, the regulatory cost, utility cost are adding between 16 and 18,000 to their properties, and they're having to make determinations now whether or not they want to scale down or scale up to meet their margins. So fascinating discussion. I really appreciate all y'all's time today, and it's been really thought-provoking and interesting in my opinion. I hope our audience has enjoyed the time. Sorry about the issue with the presentation, audience. We will make sure to have those all those presentations to you later today, available on the portal and at stateofrealestateinc.com. So please join me in thanking Robert, Jessica, and George for joining us today.